Hej! Varmt välkommen. Idag är det inte ett god morgon, utan god eftermiddag. Men varmt välkommen in till den sista dagen av Noble Week. Det känns nästan lite sjukt att vi redan är här. Men det känns också fantastiskt roligt att få välkomna till den här dagen. För det här har jag sett fram emot under hela veckan. Jag vill börja med att personligen skicka ut ett jättetack till alla er som har skickat meddelanden, sms, mail med hejarop och uppmuntringar kring veckan. Det har betytt massor för mig och för oss alla, så ett jättetack för dem verkligen. Och vi är så glada att vi har fått möjlighet att göra det här, och vi hoppas verkligen att vi ska få möjlighet att göra det igen. Och jag tror kanske att det var ett nytt rekord med meddelanden efter vår föreläsning igår med Mats. Det var många som verkligen uppskattade det. Jag tror många kände igen sig i hela situationen utav self-paced learning, utmaningarna att både skapa engagemanget, hitta tiden till det. Och det var en sak som verkligen fastnade för mig kring det som Mats sa. Han uttryckte som att vi vet väldigt sällan vad vi behöver lära oss för framtiden. Och det där tror jag är en bra sak att påminna sig om, att vi vet inte alltid exakt vilken kunskap som vi kommer behöva i framtiden. Utan en viktig del utav att arbeta med lärande är att hjälpa, om det är personer i vår organisation eller representanter, som Jeanette uttrycker det så fint, så gäller det att lära dem att lära sig bättre. För just skillen eller kunskapen vet vi inte alltid hur den kommer kunna appliceras på bästa sätt. Och därför tyckte jag om att Mats var så generös och berättade om alla de experimenten som de bedriver, vilka lärdomar de har dratt från dem och vad de kommer testa ännu mer framöver. Och jag tyckte framför allt om det som han sa, kopplat till att hela tiden försöka göra det mer lättillgängligt. Att sänka trösklarna för deras medarbetare, både genom att se till att utbildningen finns när de behöver det. Att inte behöva vänta 3 månader för att den här omgången var full. Eller att se till att kunskapen finns i en miljö där redan medarbetarna befinner sig, så man inte behöver ta sig till ytterligare ett system för att lära sig där. Det tror jag de gör otroligt bra, och jag är så glad att Mats delade med sig av detta till oss. Nu vill jag komma in på dagen. Och dagen är lite speciell, för vi har vår fantastiska gäst Julie Dirksen med oss. Och därför kommer jag nu övergå från svenska till engelska istället, för att både presentera henne och dagen. So the day that we have together, we will recognize a lot of the previous days. You will recognize a lot of the structure that we have. For the upcoming 35, maybe 40 minutes, Julie will do a presentation regarding how to change behaviors. And just like before, I really want to see that engagement in the chat, because that helps us afterwards in having a really productive conversation about this. So as soon as a question comes up, make sure to post that in the chat. And I'll promise I'll do my best in finding that one and highlighting it afterwards. And we also have my amazing colleague Julia that will be making sure to always keep the conversation going in the chat and making sure that nothing is being missed, and that I bring up all the things that you mentioned to me. I want to go into the woman of the hour, Julie Dirksen. I'm so glad to have Julie Dirksen with us, and she's an expert within workplace learning and development. I think most of you know her from her book Design for How People Learn, a bestseller that's been sold in over 50,000, maybe even 60,000 copies is the latest update. Julie is well known and been working with a lot of big organizations. Some of them are Google, Microsoft, Pfizer, just to name a few. And her superpower is taking complex topics and explaining them in a clear and really practical way. And Julie explains to me that She's the happiest when she gets to learn new things. And I love that quote that you put on your website. Fuel injection systems? Sure. Why not learn about fuel injection systems? For me, that's good music in my ears. Julie is an award-winning translator of research, and we're so happy to have her with us here on the Noli stage. Thank you for being here, and a warm, warm welcome, Julie Dirksen.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. So I hope you've all been having a wonderful week with all of the different speakers. I was getting an explanation of kind of who had come before, and it sounded like it was really interesting stuff. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about design for behavior change. And I got very interested in this topic probably about 15 years ago. I was working on a project that was AIDS and HIV prevention. And it was an interesting topic to me because clearly these people, it wasn't about people not getting the message. Like people had heard about these things. There were other things that were coming into play in terms of whether people were practicing safe behaviors or not. And so I was like, well, what is in our toolbox besides just telling people more, sort of more information? And so that's where I got interested in this topic. And the elephant reference will become apparent in a few minutes. But we have this all the time, right? We learn, we create training programs, and the salespeople can learn all the features and benefits of 37 products. And they can still sell only the 3 products that they're really comfortable with. Like the knowledge in itself doesn't always change the behavior. Or a construction worker can, learn all of the safety guidelines and still forget to put their safety glasses on because they left it in the truck. So, so when we look at this and we get into things like e-learning, an employee can know that the e-learning content is genuinely important. And I think we've all had this situation in the last year where that the Zoom meeting that you're in is genuinely important, or the stuff you're trying to read online is genuinely important. And yet, you still find yourself kind of not paying attention or getting through it as quickly as possible, because even though intellectually, it's important, sort of emotionally or physically you're exhausted, or you've been on Zoom for 9 hours, or you've, just had to focus on too many different things, and there's competing priorities. So this leads to this question that I really have been thinking about most of my professional life, which is, why do people do the wrong things? Why can't they just do the right things? It'd be so much easier if people just did the right things, particularly when they know better. So the way that I describe the behavior change problems that we're trying to address with the kinds of things we're going to talk about today is people know the right thing to do and they're still not doing it. So any situation that you've got in your audiences where people know that the right thing is this, and yet it's still not happening for some reason, getting into kind of why is that happening? Because in our ideal world, behavior change would work like this. We'd say, by the way, smoking is bad for you. And the person would say, oh my goodness, you're right, I'll never smoke again. And if it was just that easy, then we could change all sorts of behaviors. And we're all in the world's biggest behavior change experiment right now, with COVID and the pandemic, has been a massive, massive behavior change experiment, and has been really remarkably successful in a lot of ways. A lot of people change their behaviors in a hurry to try to accommodate this, but we also know that there's a number of people who maybe didn't change their behaviors enough, or there's issues in terms of what they understand or believe about what behaviors need to change. There's been a lot of research coming out about messaging for behavior change, or how do you talk to people, or how do you construct the environments, or what guidelines do you give, that all kind of impact these things. And when they know, it's interesting to get into the issue of why does it still happen? So for example, everybody probably knows that texting while driving is bad. But it still happens. People still text while driving. And I know it's a bad idea, and I never do it, except when I do, and then I feel guilty, right? Some people, I think, use that one. I know it's a bad idea, but I only do it once in a while, and I'm very careful. I know it's a bad idea for other people, but I could do it because I'm really good at it. And then occasionally you'll get somebody who's like, maybe they're a teenager just learning to drive, and they're like, huh, what's the big deal, right? But most of these have the thing they have in common is it starts with I know, which means that the gap between where they are now and where they need to be isn't knowledge. They already have the knowledge. The gap is something else. And so adding more knowledge into the system probably isn't going to change the behavior. So one of the reasons we think this stuff happens is because logical decision making isn't entirely logical, right? So if you think about your brain, we've got, sort of general brain regions, and the oldest parts of your brain are things like automatic functions like breathing and heart rate and reflexes, and the places where those live are kind of down by the base of your spinal cord. And then you have things like gross movement and fine motor control, hearing, vision, are all sort of kind of towards the back of the brain. And then right in the middle of your brain, you have the limbic system, which is things like the amygdala and the hypothalamus, and that's very much where like emotion lives, so fight or flight and emotional reactions and those kinds of things. And then right up in front, you have the most recently evolved part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is generally considered to be logic, reasoning, executive control, impulse control, all of those kinds of functions. And so if you think about this in terms of a metaphor, it's like a little rider that is your conscious verbal thinking brain sitting on the back of a big elephant that is automatic, emotional, visceral, that controls all your physicality, deals with sensory perception and your physical sense of the world and all this kind of stuff. So little rider, big elephant. And it turns out there's a lot of our understanding of thinking and decision making that says, hey, both of these entities participate in decision making. So your rider says things like, I should order a salad, or I really should get this homework out of the way, or exercising now will give me more energy later. And the elephant says stuff like, oh, French fries, or hey, look, celebrity chef death match is on TV, or I'm just going to lie down on this couch for just 1 minute. And so when you've got these two different entities playing, they make decisions. And so when there's a conflict, we can think about who gets to decide in that instance. Sometimes the rider decides, sometimes the elephant decides. So if I'm in Minneapolis and it's pretty early here. It's just after 8 a.m. And my alarm went off a little over an hour ago, basically. And there's this decision of when the alarm goes off, do you get right up? And it's like, I should get up because I want to take a look at my slides before this presentation, and I should get coffee before I talk to people and all this kind of stuff. And you should get up, and you should get up. And yet the elephant gets a vote in that as well. And so you wind up hitting the snooze button at least once in terms of doing that. And that's a pretty classic example. So the impulse to get up and be responsible and get ready for work and get your stuff all taken care of versus the impulse to stay in bed where it's nice and warm. And we were talking about how it's getting dark, it's staying dark later in the morning and it's getting dark early. We're not quite as far north as you are, but where I live is pretty far north in the US. And so it's also getting dark pretty early here, and it's still dark when I wake up in the morning and things like that. And so the elephant gets this vote around, what are we going to do? And part of the deal is the elephant's very focused on what's happening right now. So it cares very much about like what's comfortable and nice now. And we'll talk more about that. Another big question to consider when you have learners who know what they're doing, but they still aren't doing it. They know the thing, but is where are they getting stuck? And this scale is modified from some research by Robert West and some of his colleagues, where they looked at kind of where along the scale are people in terms of the behavior. So is the problem that they don't know at all about the behavior? Like nobody's brought up the question of, Like nobody's ever spoken to him about how exercise is good for you and you should exercise every day. They don't know anything about the behavior. Probably not. Although, in the case of mask wearing, for example, wearing masks, that was probably something where that was a genuinely new behavior to some people. And so just informing them that mask wearing was useful during COVID might be an important thing. They know about the behavior, but they don't understand why it's important, right? So to use the mask wearing example, there was a lot of confusion early on would masks be helpful and should I wear one? And all of those, what does it do when I wear it? And, does it protect me or does it protect other people? Like there was a lot of confusion about why was this an important behavior. They understand the explanation for why it's important, but they don't believe it or they don't buy in. They're skeptical of the answer. They think the behavior is worth it, but not a priority at the moment. Like, oh yeah, I should exercise more, but you know what? It's really busy and it's winter and I don't know. I'll get to it later. Thinks the behavior is a priority, but doesn't know how to do it. So, okay, I want to add 20 minutes of exercise into every day, but I don't really know what I want to do. Like what's something that is going to be easy and sustainable. Thinks the behavior is a priority, but thinks it's too hard in the environment, either the physical or social environment, or isn't confident about their ability to do it. So I know I should network more when I'm at at a meeting, at an association meeting, but I'm not feeling confident that I do this well and that I come across well and that I know how to do this thing. Is ready to try, but needs that just little help getting started. They just need that little push to help get started. Has started, but it's rocky. They're having trouble staying motivated. Has been doing it for a while, but isn't really as consistent as we'd like. And then finally has been consistent or successful, but now like you've been doing this thing for quite a while, but now we're starting to fall off the behavior. And when we're talking about these, a lot of this, especially these lower ones, are about these behaviors that we want people to do every day. So sometimes there's a single behavior, like, go get your first vaccine shot that we want. And so as long as somebody goes out and, does the behavior, we're pretty happy. Versus certain behaviors where it's like exercise, we want you to do that every single day. Or healthy eating, we want you to do that every single day. How do you do that? And those are much harder because we need the behavior to stay and become a habit, and become consistent. And honestly, these ones at the bottom here are some of the harder ones in terms of having good research guidelines, because these are harder to study. It's a lot easier to study how do you get somebody started on something than why did they do it for 8 months and then stop doing it, especially when my study only ran for 6 months. So there are certain things that really the elephant finds persuasive. One is, how big is the reward? What do I get? Or how big is the consequence? What bad thing will happen? And so sometimes we really focus on that. We talk about in learning and development, we often talk about WIFM, what's in it for me, and what do I get if I do this thing, or what bad thing do I avoid if I do this thing? But there's other factors that come into this too. So not only how big is it, but when does it happen? We'll talk about that one. How tangible is it? And how likely is it? So if we look at these, of course, the elephant wants things that are big, that happen now, that feel real to them, and that are very certain. And a lot of times the behaviors we're trying to change don't necessarily fit into those things. So when we talk about the now versus later, this is kind of a classic human dilemma, right? So do you want to start working on that project that's due in a few weeks? And the writer says, absolutely, getting a start on it now will make it much less stressful. I should work on it now. And the elephant says, what? Of course not. There are Facebook posts to read right now. So even though the project is probably more satisfying than going out and checking Facebook is immediate. It's not as satisfying, but you can have it right now. And because it's not just the amount of the reward, it also is when we get it. So if we look at 10 euros versus 11 euros, I think we'd all agree that 11 euros, if I was handing out money, 11 euros would be better than 10 euros. Simple math, right? But if I ask the question of whether you'd rather have 10 euros today versus 11 euros tomorrow, what do people want? I don't know if they can answer in the chat, and you can maybe tell me what they're saying. I have the chat open in the English one, but or in the Braille, but I don't know if it's the right one. But if you vote, or do you want 10 euros today or 11 euros tomorrow?
I'll make sure to highlight what they're saying here, Julie, so you get it as well.
Okay.
A lot of people are saying now they want the 10.
Yeah, but it's mixed, right? Like some people are opting in. Yeah, and so usually when I ask that question, it's 50-50, 60-40. Sometimes it's 70-30. Granted, we won't be here tomorrow, so it's more certain to take the one today. But it's a mix. Okay, so if I ask another question, 10 euros today or 11 euros in a year, what do people want? If they want to put it in the chat.
Yeah.
10 euros today or 11 euros in a year.
Let's see how many are rational and thinking about interest you can get on the stock market. And
yeah, the only people who ever want the 11 euros in a year want to talk to me about interest rates.
Yeah, we see a lot more 10 today than we did before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 10. So it's the same problem in each equation, right? Like if you're getting both today, everybody's going to want the 11.
Yeah.
If you're getting it tomorrow, the 11 tomorrow, it's a mix, right? And if you're getting it in a year, pretty much everybody wants the 10 immediately.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the same math. It's just different time frames. And the term for this is hyperbolic discounting or temporal discounting. And it's a really well-researched aspect of behavioral economics. Kahneman and Tversky, Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow and has got the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. This is some of their research. And they find that when you get a reward right now, it's the most valuable to you. And if you start to push it into the future, it starts to fall off in this hyperbolic curve. And so so tomorrow will be worth a bit less, and a year from now, it's going to be worth a lot less to me. So if you think about this is a lot of the behaviors that we struggle with as humans. So smoking, the consequence for smoking is very bad. It could be death, right? But it's death pushed out 20 years in the future. And so lots of people can still discount it enough that it's not changing their behavior. If you smoked a cigarette today, and I said, by smoking that cigarette today, there's a 20% chance you'll die tomorrow, people would probably, make different decisions in a lot of cases about smoking. Saving for retirement, I have to give up something now for something that I don't get until I'm 65 or whenever you retire. Exercise, I have to expend the effort now, and I might not see the benefit of it for a week, 4 or 6 weeks. Food, it tastes good now, I get all benefit now, and the negative consequence doesn't come for a while. So, and this is a really interesting one in terms of learning too, because typically the reward for getting to learn something is I get to use it, I get to do something with it. So when I'm learning something, I'm having to pay attention, study something now that I can't use for several months, then it's harder for me to pay attention because I don't get that reward. That reward is discounted by me not being able to use it right away. So if we think about these things, how big is the reward? How quickly do I get it? How tangible is it? How likely is it? And we look at something like performance appraisal systems. So let's say I'm going to create training for managers who need to use a performance appraisal system. And I'm talking to them about, hey, it's really important you come to this training and pay attention. If I ask myself, how big is the reward of using this new system? Well, managers could have better relationships with their employees, and they could have better outcomes, and they could feel more effective as managers. Those are all pretty big rewards. How quickly will that happen? Probably not very immediate. Yeah, it's a little dodgy. How tangible does that feel when you're telling somebody you have to come to a training class and use this performance appraisal system? Does that feel really tangible and connected to those rewards? Probably not very much. And likelihood is a problem. You might get those rewards, you might not get those rewards. It's hard to say. It depends on how effective you are for it. You have to believe that the system will actually help before you even believe the rewards are coming. And so when we look at these kinds of things, we often emphasize, hey, this does really great things for you, but we don't say, and here's how quickly you'll get it, and here's how we're going to make that tangible and feel real for you, and here's, you know, what the likelihood is, those kinds of things. And we need to think about, when I take my behavior into the real world and I get feedback on it, what does that feedback look like? I think everybody would agree with the statement that we learn from experience. But a friend of mine joined a gym a few years ago, and she went in, and she had a trainer who was helping her, and the trainer was like, it was like she was joining the military or something. She was doing lunges across the gym floor, and she was doing all this cardio, and she was doing all this stuff. And she was so sore the next day after this session that she could barely move. You know, every part of her body was aching from this. And when we asked the question of what did she learn from that experience, what you want to learn from exercise is that it's great. It makes you feel better and it makes you healthier. But if you feel terrible afterwards, what does the elephant think of that experience at that point? I don't know if people are speculating. What's that? Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the elephant is like, that was horrible. We shouldn't do that, right? And here's the thing, the elephant isn't stupid. Like, they're right. The outcome of this was painful and unpleasant. And a part of the elephant's job is to protect us from things that are painful and unpleasant. But the elephant doesn't understand that if I do this painful, unpleasant thing now, I get this benefit in the future. Only the rider understands that, because the rider is the part of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex, that can do things like project out into the future and consider consequences. The elephant's really only concerned with what's happening right now. And so we wind up with these situations where these two entities are basically fighting with each other. The rider's like, no, we just do this horrible, painful thing and it'll be better. The elephant's like, I don't think you're right. I don't believe you, basically. And so when we look at this, one of the tools that's in the toolbox is making some of these things more tangible and real. This is one of my favorite studies. This is out of Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Laboratory. And they wanted to look at the question of experiencing the consequences of behavior. So the behavior they picked was environmental choices. And so using less disposable paper. And so what they did is they had two groups. One went into a condition where they read about trees being cut down to provide disposable paper products. And the other one went into a virtual reality environment where they cut down virtual trees with a virtual chainsaw. And apparently when the tree fell down, like the floor would shake and stuff. It was very immersive. And you can tour their lab online if you've got a VR headset. It's in the Steam store. There's a free tour of their lab and their research. And so they came out and they said, all right, how many of you will use less paper, knowing what you know about, here's the trees that get cut down to supply this paper. And both groups said in about equal numbers, yeah, we'll use less paper, because that's the rider projecting out into future behavior. But then they would accidentally spill a glass of water while people were leaving the room, and then count how many pieces of paper towel they would use to mop up the spill. And it turns out the people who had been in the more visceral condition, where they were actually holding the chainsaw and cutting down the trees, used almost 20% less paper than the people who had just been thinking about it cognitively in terms of the impact of the environmental impact of paper usage. And so there is something about having this visceral experience that probably makes a difference ultimately in terms of whether the behavior change actually occurs. You can use this the other way. You can take a choice that you want people to do less, and you can figure out, how do I make it less tangible, right? Sort of appealing things. So Google did this study in their New York office where they had these machines, you know, these bins with M&Ms, and you'd put your cup and you'd hold it up and M&Ms would fall into your cup, right? And they said, okay, we've got this food, we've got these snacks. How do we, without taking away the candy, how do we make it a little bit, you know, easier for people to make healthy choices about eating? So if we wanted to make this, right now, this is pretty appealing to the elephant. It's colorful. You notice it the minute you walk into the room. It's right there. You know, it just pours out of the machine, as many as you want, all that kind of thing. And so so that's the elephant, is like, you don't even need to want candy until you walk into the room and all of a sudden you want candy. And marketers know this, right? This is how they do products and things like that. So if we wanted to make this a little bit more of a cognitive decision and a little bit less of an emotional, visceral decision, we can change the containers. So it can be an opaque container, so you don't see the candy, and it's got a little label and it tells you how many calories there are. And instead of it falling from the sky, you scoop it up. You still can have it. It's still there. You still have that choice, but it's not nearly as reach out and grab your elephant as it was. And in the consequences were, in 7 weeks, New York Googlers consumed 3.1 million fewer calories from M&Ms. I don't remember how many people are in that office, but that's still a lot of calories from M&Ms. So taking, positive choices and making them more visceral and being able to more tangible for people, and then taking negative choices and making them less, seems to have a big impact on behavior. One of the big questions is, where does the feedback become visible? And because I would say I've never seen a behavior change problem where delayed or absent feedback wasn't part of the problem. So if we look at my hand right now, there's my hand. It looks pretty clean, right? Now, if I am a medical professional, I know that my hand is not clean enough because I've been like touching stuff on my desk, and I've washed them this morning, but I haven't, it's now a little while ago since I washed them. I've been interacting with the world. But who knows that my hand isn't clean? Is it the rider or the elephant? Because the rider knows about things like germ theory and the conceptual, spreading infection through physical contact and all that kind of stuff. The elephant's like, no, it looks pretty good. I think it's not bad. And when we think about hand washing in healthcare, I don't think we have a problem. If you actually have stuff that's visible on your hands, you wash your hands. Like, I don't think that's the problem. It's I've washed my hands 17 times in the last hour, and I need to wash them again because I touched like 3 things. So even though it doesn't look dirty, I know that I still need to wash them again. I think that's where we start to have trouble with hand washing, right? And also, if I think about the consequences of not washing my hands as a health professional, somebody could get sick. If I have germs on my hands, somebody could get sick. However, am I ever likely to know that if I don't wash my hands at 3:00 on Thursday, that I made this particular person sick? The answer is, in our modern healthcare, no. There's probably no way to know. They're interacting with too many people. They're doing their own kinds of things that could cause it, all this sort of stuff. And so that does not become visible at the individual level. It might show up at the group level. It might show up at the system level, but we're not going to get immediate feedback on this. And so these tend to be the really hard problems, because the elephant's like, I think it's all right. Let's just keep going. We're real busy. There's a lot going on, and it is having to kind of ask the rider to always make that. So how do we make that more tangible to the elephant? Because that makes the behavior more certain. Some of the tools for this, and I know we want to get to the Q&A, so I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly. But some of the tools, social interaction is a big piece. We pay attention to what other elephants are doing. So if other elephants are washing their hands, we will probably wash our hands. But then one of the things that we can do as learning professionals is help make those behaviors more visible. So if most people are washing their hands, you want to make that visible. Now, we listen to authority figures, but it turns out it's interesting which authority figures we always listen to. So I worked on a curriculum for 12-year-old kids about drug and alcohol prevention. And you could say, well, an authority figure to talk to kids about drugs might be parents or teachers or police officers. But it turns out that they did research, and the really authoritative source, if you're a 12, 13-year-old, is like 15, 16-year-olds. So if they heard from 15, 16-year-olds about why drugs were bad, that was much more persuasive than hearing from any adults that we could talk to. So thinking about who can model behavior and who's the really authoritative source for the particular audience that you're dealing with. And social norming. Don't tell people it's a terrible problem. Tell people that most people don't do this thing. And they've used this for energy consumption or binge drinking for college students or smoking or tax compliance. If I believe that I'm out of step with my social group, that's a much bigger impact on my behavior than you constantly telling me it's a terrible, terrible problem. So we look at other people for cues on how to act. We also want to make sure that it's aligned with their values. So knowledge is probably the fastest thing we can change about people. Skills and attitudes are a little slower, but those foundation things, culture, core values, personality traits, if we're doing this, we need to say, here's how this behavior aligns with values we already have. We're not going to change their values. My favorite example of this was getting people to change their values about the environment in Texas. And you probably have some idea of what you picture as Texas in the US. They wanted in the 80s to do a campaign with 18 to 35-year-old males around reducing littering. So they wanted them to, throw less trash on the ground and, whatever else. So, there's lots of messages around environmental stuff. You should be kind to Mother Earth, and you should be green, and you should be sustainable. And none of these messages really resonated with that particular group that they were targeting. So they came up with a message called "Don't Mess with Texas," which is very much this sort of and they had action movie stars and football players and country western singers and things like that all say, you know what, nobody messes with Texas. And that campaign was credited with reducing litter on Texas highways roughly 72% between the 1986 and 1990. And what it did is it aligned with the values. They were very proud to be from Texas. And so if you're proud to be from Texas, so the value that already existed, if I can align the behavior of not littering with that value, I'd go much further. A couple of things. We know from the pandemic that a lot of people are reacting to just being told what to do. They don't like it. So instead of saying, let me tell you why the behavior is important, if you ask people to tell you why the behavior is important, so all you do is you flip that question at the beginning of the class and say, instead of me telling you, you tell me why this behavior is important. They offer it up, and then all of a sudden their attitude is very different in terms of how that goes. I'm gonna just get to a few of these others because I know we're getting to meet pretty much time. The hand washing, this is a video I really like where they painted a patient green, and then everybody who touches the patient winds up spreading green paint around the room. And that takes something that's conceptual, germs, and makes it much more visible and visceral and real. So that's another tool. We talked about this one. Showing consequences. Scare tactics typically have a mixed value, but if you are going to use them, it has to feel very real to people. It can't just be conceptual. Lots of people die if they text while driving. It has to feel real. In one study, they looked at whether or not just the message on smoking packages was versus pictures of a diseased lung, which was more effective. The diseased lung creates more intentions for behavior. And when they've done this in Australia in particular, they found that it does actually, the visible picture of the tangible thing does reduce smoking behaviors more than just a text message, for example. People like things they own. There's a famous study called the Ikea effect, where people value something more if they made it. And so when we come to solutions for behavior change, you want people to participate in creating their own solutions, because then they have a vested interest in it. And so things like feeling autonomous and control, feeling like it's part of my identity, all of those kinds of things go into it. There's a great case study in the book Better about the hand washing, where they involved the entire staff in the hand washing solutions. And that seemed to be the thing that really made a difference, was getting everybody involved, not just telling people to wash their hands more. Social connection, big, huge one. Do I see other people doing the behavior? Do other people support me in the behavior? Using the right role models. If you look at an Amazon review, I don't know about you, but I always go straight to the user reviews, and I actually usually look at the bad ones. And so I trust that more than the message from the publisher. I trust that more than the message from other, people who've written blurbs, all those kinds of things. Like, who do I care the most about in terms of trusting their opinion about a behavior. Showing off positive examples is a way of modeling the right behavior. And then practicing it so that you get comfortable with it and you feel it. This is also from the drug and alcohol prevention curriculum. And they had kids practice over and over and over again how they'd handle the situation, which was much more useful than just saying, hey, kids, drugs are bad. We want to reduce friction. We want to make it as easy as possible. Hand washing compliance went way up when the alcohol-based hand rubs became available because that was just easier. And so now more people are using them. You can put triggers in the environment that remind people to do the behavior. And you want to really create a path for them. This is from Boston, where there's a tourist path. And if you want to see all the sites in Boston, you just follow this red brick line and it takes you the places you go. So, having the guidance right there in the environment made the behavior much, much easier. And that's it. Those are some of the strategies around helping people with behavior change when they know what to do and they're still not doing it. If you have any follow-up questions, we're going to do questions now. If you have anything else too, you can come and ask me on my Facebook group or send me an email or things like that. So thanks, everybody.
We're the ones saying thanks. This was amazing. Thank you so much for this. I love these. I love the design in Boston as an example. It's such a simple thing, but hey, what it does for me when coming there as a tourist. Like, all right, they actually put up bricks for me. I'll just follow them. It's a lot easier than trying to figure out the map and finding some sort of interesting thing on that map. It's simple.
Yeah. And it's if your goal is to reduce error as much as possible, those kinds of solutions have a way lower error rate than maps or an app on your phone or, letting people just wander around or, whatever.
Exactly.
So.
Or like our coffee machine.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions, so I want to get to them right away. We have one first from Patrick Bergman. So he's asking about the challenge with not always training being the correct solution or maybe the best suited solution for the problem that we have.
Yep.
What's your ideas here? What do you think? Like, how can we help an organization not too fast fall into the trap of solution training?
Yeah, no, and I've got a list of stuff that I usually go through, and I'm like, okay, what are the incentives for this behavior, and what is the thing that's causing them to be reluctant about it, and really going through those. Making sure you're asking questions about, like, making sure people are being specific about the behaviors that they want to see. Because sometimes you get things like, we need training on being more customer focused. Yeah. Well, customer focused is nice, but what does that actually translate into in terms of actions? Yes. Like, if somebody is customer focused, what are they doing? Yeah. So sometimes I'll ask this question. I'll be like, okay, if I use my phone and I take a picture or a video of somebody being customer focused, what do I see?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, as a way to try to get them to think about making it concrete. And then once you have a concrete behavior, so they need to change the lid on the coffee machine, then the question is, what's the thing that's causing them to not do it? I was working on when it was training for vaccine providers, right? People who are doing vaccinations. And one of the things that would happen is if you recap a needle, you can stick yourself, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's very bad because it's a needle that's been in somebody's arm and you don't know. So you don't want this behavior. You want people to take a cap and a needle and put it back together. Right. And so the question was whether or not messaging around that was going to change it. And so one of the things we were looking at, and this is still in progress, I don't have any data on it, but can we change the behavior of as soon as you take the cap off, you throw it away? Because then you can't restick the needle, because really you shouldn't. You don't need to restick it. You should just throw the whole thing in the sharps container. And so instead of like convincing people not to do this automatic behavior, can we eliminate the cap earlier in the process so that they can't recap the needle? Because the answers to recapping a needle safely are dumb. Like, you try to thread it with one hand so that you're not doing two hands like that, and nobody's going to do that. So trying to find a replacement behavior that kind of stands in. And so it's always worth asking those questions. It's always worth asking, what are people being measured on and how are they being incented? So I was talking to a group about data entry for insurance applications. And they
Right.
said, people aren't paying attention to accuracy. Can we put something in the training that makes it clear that accuracy is important? And I'm like, sure, that's fine. We can put something in the training. Tell me, how do they know if they're being accurate? And they're like, I don't know if they get any feedback on that. And I'm like, okay, how do they get compensated? What's their incentives? And they're like, oh, the number of applications they do in an hour. And it's like, we can put something in the training, sure, but you see where the problem lives. Yeah. The problem lives over in the feedback and in the incentives.
Yeah. Did they get that right away as well? When they said
yeah. I mean, do I think they changed anything? No, probably not. But they understood. Yeah. So
I see something that we come back to here a lot is we need to establish what behavior it is. Yeah. What I see quite often is that it's hard for people to actually think about behaviors. Too often when we're starting to think about or talking about behaviors, I'm getting replies like, yeah, that's hard. It's tough for us to say what that is. It could be so many things. I think finding ways to simplify what is a behavior. I really like the phone thing. I'm using a fly. If I'm a fly on the wall, what am I seeing? But I really like the phone because we use that so much. We can understand what a picture will be or what a video on my phone is actually doing. So I like that. I'll steal that one. That was really good. Patrick is asking a really good second question as well. He wants to know what you're thinking about gamification.
Gamification is an interesting one because there's good things about it, but there's also been a lot of problems with it. One of the issues that we see with it is you have to be careful that you're incenting the right behaviors with gamification. A lot of times it got turned into sort of adding rewards to things. So for example, I have an app on my phone for Audible, which is the audiobook service. It's the one owned by Amazon. And they've got a bunch of badges on there in their gamification for, did you listen to a lot of audiobooks last weekend? Or did you listen to 100 hours of audiobooks? And none of those things are in any way tied to the reason that I listen to audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks for two main reasons. I listen to books about psychology and things like that for professional development, and I listen to books for entertainment, right? And in neither of those cases does the number of minutes that I listen to an audiobook help me. It doesn't, it's irrelevant, right? Now, things that I might care about is, did I listen to 5 neuroscience books? Well, that might be I care about because I'm trying to educate myself about this topic. And so if you have a gamification thing, in that case, it's irrelevant. Like, I've never paid any attention to these badges, and they're kind of stupid and a little bit annoying. So it was a wasted effort. But then we also have gamification efforts where we've created pretty poor incentives for people. There was a case in, I think it's Oklahoma City. I have it in one of my longer presentations, where they had a big healthy program, Healthy Behaviors. And what you could do is you could report your healthy behaviors to an app or to a website or something, and if you get certain points for these healthy behaviors, and if you get enough points for these healthy behaviors, they give you a gift card that you could use at a store. And they found 5 people who altogether reported so many healthy behaviors that they got altogether the 5 people got about $300,000 worth of gift cards. Wow. Yeah, and one person in particular, I think, got a 160 or 180,000 of the dollars or something. And so she was reporting that her family members, she reported that her child had run marathons and triathlons and all these kinds of things. It turned out her kid was 3. So so it was a case where they had made the reward more important than the actual value of doing the behavior. And so these people were doing great at this game because you made the gamification about getting the points, which made about getting the gift cards. It also turned out it was fraud and it was illegal, but they were winning. They were winning the game. And so you really want to be careful with any kind of gamification stuff, that your rewards match up with the actual behaviors that really are important, and also the things that the person values. So a gamification that makes the whole thing more fun is
Yeah.
great, or that makes you a team, so that you can all participate together and socially support each other through healthy behaviors. Fabulous gamification. A gamification that's all about getting financial reward is almost always going to cause problems, because people will figure out the way to play the game most effectively to get the reward,
Yeah.
not necessarily. And if that's not well matched up with the healthy behavior, then so a better reward might be, you guys, your department gets time to go play a game and go play football in the park,
Yeah.
right? So the reward is actually going and doing something healthy, but you get time off from work, so you get to go do something fun, but it's also healthy. Or you all get to take a walk, or something like that,
Yeah.
where you're actually making all of those things line up with the actual behaviors that you're trying to see.
Nice. And I think on the same topic, it's good when you are starting to use or trying out gamification to do it small scale. Because what I realized that we can have an intuition that this will be the consequences of these gamified approaches, but quite often that intuition is not always correct. We will find other ways, or people will do behaviors or things that we haven't been able to see, and it's quite good to be able to see it at small scale and then scale it up.
There's good forms of gamification which make an activity more fun to do, right? That's better than something that's very heavily based on rewards. And gamification can mean all sorts of things. There's really good people in this. Amy Jo Kim has some really nice stuff on like social games, and how does that kind of create sort of intrinsic rewards around some of these activities. Sebastian Detterjing's older stuff on gamification is very good at sort of pointing out the issues with these misaligned incentives and rewards. Nicole Lazzaro has a structure of like game fun, different kinds of fun in games, and so moving away from the reward-based things to other things that make the behavior fun or interesting or entertaining to do.
Nice.
So
awesome that you mentioned this, and we're going to do our best to collect these and all the other book recommendations that we've gotten during the week, and you will all get a collection of that on Monday.
Yeah, I think on my website on Usable Learning, I've got some resources sections, and I've got one that's got game design resources on it.
Perfect.
So there's a page that has stuff on it.
Link in that as well into the Monday activity. We got a question from Peter Bjellerup. A lot of the things that he heard during the presentation, he said, this sounds a lot like great arguments to start using micro-learnings or micro-trainings.
It could be, yeah. I mean, but that, the issue with a lot of micro-learning is that it functions best as kind of performance support. So I'm in the middle of doing something and I need to figure out how to, I'm in the middle of this and I need to figure out how to change the settings in my, my print out a document or something, to be able to jump out and grab a little video on YouTube that explains it to me really quick is fantastic. A lot of micro-learning focuses on information delivery. And so again, if that's not the problem, now it doesn't have to. Micro-learning could be about making a social example, or, providing a case study, or, those kinds of things. I was talking to a client the other day about they're changing their values framework for the organization. And so they want to do training on this values framework. And so we had a lot of conversations around, okay, if these values are new and updated, what actions are people going to take? And so how do you create a bunch of, say, micro-learning support around, oh, you want to do this? Consider this, so that it's a small and, digestible thing, and really focused on an action. Okay, you're trying to solve this problem. Like your team isn't doing this behavior. Here's how you can use these values in a useful way to solve this particular problem. And then also little mini case studies of people applying the values so that they can see lots of case examples. Because a lot of behaviors, especially skills-based things, that are happening more ambiguous circumstances. So not something where it's clearly laid out procedures. You want to see more examples of how people apply it. So say social learning, like you can read the principles of social learning and that's great. But if you can see lots of little case studies about how social learning gets applied, then I think you have way more ideas than just hearing like social learning's good and you should use it. So
perfect. Amazing. We have another comment from Caroline Lippers. IKEA is a strong example of using this human need of instant gratification in their business idea that you can pick up from furniture right away. They really changed the customer's behavior back in the days. I think coming back to the IKEA concept as well of you putting things together, you've done a lot of good things when it comes to behavioral change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've done a couple of things. One is they've really leaned into the how do we make this as simple as possible.
Yeah.
So, anything that you buy from IKEA that you have to assemble, I'm weird. I think it's fun to put together stuff from IKEA. I think that's entertaining. And you get this, but you do get this feeling of like, like, oh, I built this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's much more than I could have built if I was just using wood and tools. I couldn't build this, but because this was set up, I feel like somebody who can build bookshelves or whatever it is. Yeah. And so yeah, they lean very heavily into both the how do we make the behavior as simple as possible, but also how do I give you a feeling of mastery at the end of it, like I've really accomplished something.
Yeah, I actually heard that at some furnitures they actually put in some extra steps. Like they could have made it even simpler, but they realized that to get that feeling of I've actually done this, they've like added a few steps. You're actually getting that feeling that they actually test that quite a lot.
Yeah, there's a story about the early when they started making baking, like a cake mix or something to put in a box, where they used to be you just added water and that's all you needed to do. And apparently a lot of homemakers didn't feel like they were doing anything, and so it felt sort of like cheating. And so they actually they had powdered egg in these, and they actually took it out, and they added a few more steps into making it so that person would feel like they'd actually done something or kind of contributed. And so I think it's the same idea where it's like you want somebody to have that feeling of satisfaction once they've done the thing. And if you make it, some things people don't care about that feeling of satisfaction, and so they just want it to be easy. But in other things, you want people to feel like, hey, I did a thing. So
I think especially when it comes to a furniture, because people will comment on it when they get back and they're like, yeah, actually, I put that one together. Or you've been baking. People will comment like, oh, this tasted so good. Yes, I've baked it. If you haven't got that feeling around that you have done it, and you have to say like, yeah, it's actually powder, you don't want to have to give that answer. You will want to say, yes, I've actually done that. I think it's so cool that just adding that egg will create that feeling. It's cool. Julie, this has been super, super nice. I am so glad that you wanted to be with us today, and I'm so glad that we got the chance to hear you talk, to ask all these questions. So thank you so, so much for coming on to the Noli Week stage. This has been a huge honor for me, and I'm so glad that everyone got the chance to listen into you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Oops.
Thanks. And we have some, we will now open up the breakout rooms. Julie, if you want to, you're more than happy to jump into them. We'll continue discussions regarding the topic of today in them. There's also some few pointers I want to leave with you. In just a couple of minutes, you will again receive through email your goal setting of the day. So take those 2 minutes. It's just 2 minutes to get down what's one thing that really caught on from Julie's speech today, and what's one thing that you could start utilizing, doing things differently from next week on. So take that time. You've been really great at doing this for the previous day, so keep that habit of doing that. It will make all the difference for the upcoming weeks. And Julia has also posted in the chat that we've created a LinkedIn group. So for all of you that have joined the Noli Week, please join into that one. You can just click the link and we'll accept your participation in that group. And we'll also make sure to make everyone come there as well, so we can continue the networking and the discussion in the LinkedIn group going forward as well. And one last thing, we've also decided that we'll do a follow-up on Noli Week. So on the 17th of December, we'll have a morning activity to do a short recap. Be able to reflect on what things have we actually started to do differently from the week that we've had together. We'll be also talking some about the topic of transfer of training, like Julie's been talking right here. How do we change behaviors from trainings? So on the 17th, you'll get an invite for that. The idea is to get together again, make sure that we are able to visualize the progress that we've done from this week, maybe set some upcoming steps for ourselves, and talk some more about how we can work with changing behaviors from trainings. This has been a huge honor to host this. I'm so glad that I've got the chance to moderate it. Thank you to all the experts that we've had on board. You've been amazing, and thank you for all your time, everyone that has been a part of the Noli Week. Thank you to the Noli team. Without you guys, this would never be possible. So thank you, everyone. Have an awesome weekend when that comes, and I hope to see you all soon. Have a great weekend. Bye.